Steam and Sorcery, a transdimensional adventure starring Phineas Frakture and Sir Vlishginath, the Cleansing Light. Episode 9. Written by Joseph Gatch and Daniel Mitchell. Read by Fentriss O. Moore. "Professor, wait!" exclaimed Vlishginath, but Phineas was already kicking the door to the hovel open. He charged inside, and no sooner that he did was blown back out into the street by an unseen force. Retribution still rang as it was unsheathed, and with shield at the ready, Vlishginath stepped towards the portal. A long blast of fire greeted the dragon scale shield. Impervious to the flame, Vlishginath pushed himself inside against the onslaught. Just inside the doorway, the blast ceased, causing the church knight to stumble a few steps, and then a new attack came. Objects from around the abandoned house began pummeling him. Chairs, a table, debris, smashing him from all sides. His helm was clipped by a brick, sending him down to one knee, off balance. And then the roof caved in on him. Phineas pulled himself up after regaining his wind. It felt like a giant hand had pushed him through the air like he was nothing more than a rag doll. His vision cleared just in time to see the entryway to the house bury his companion. Lish, damn it! Arthur! He yelled, still stumbling over the name. He took a few unsteady steps forward and then halted. Through the settling dust, a dark hooded figure emerged. "Crap, another one of those guys," Phineas mumbled, but it wasn't the sorcerer that worried him. Following behind him was a man dressed in black armor, calmly looking down to inspect the Malandi bomb he held in his right hand before looking up to Phineas. There was a glint of metal near the rubble, Vlishginath's sword, and Phineas dove for it. As soon as he touched the hilt, however, the damn thing began speaking. "You need to find Vlishginath, or—" He dropped it immediately, not worrying about what the celestial-sounding monologue was rambling on about. His only concern was what this dark night was about to do to him. The man, though slightly shorter than Vlishginath and not quite as broad, was just as imposing. His slicked-back blonde hair and pale skin made him look almost like a walking corpse. A long scar ran down the side of his face, his mouth twisting into an insidious grin, and his pale green eyes not without a glint of madness in them. "That's mine," Phineas spat, indicating his device. "Was," replied the man. His voice was calm, nonchalant. "Why are you in the company of the church knight? What has he done for you?" Phineas looked up at him, puzzled. "He's gotten me this far," he responded. "And I can get you so much farther." He sat down on top of the rubble, heedless of the figure lying beneath it. When he spoke, his was the voice of temptation itself, his eerily serene voice well practiced at offering false promises. "Where are my manners? I am Orlox, the Life Witherer. You've heard of me? No? Well, that is not surprising from whence you came. I happen to be an old friend of our mutual acquaintance here." He patted the pile beneath him. He then looked up at the sorcerer behind him. "And this is Rebulok, my associate, very talented as you have witnessed in the arts of the arcane. Tell me, has the Order of Mythos offered you a way home yet? Judging by the look upon your face, I think not. But what if I could?" "You can do that?" Phineas asked. "Through the dead god, all things are possible." A wry smile crossed his face, the scar making it look more sinister than it was. "Not only can we send you home, we can return to you that which you desire most." Phineas's eyes widened as Rebulok waved a wooden staff that he was holding, an image of Abigail, his long-dead girlfriend, appearing in thin air. Next to her appeared William, his best friend. "How do you know about them?" Phineas sputtered. "Necros has many ties to the afterlife. While the false father would preach that you should accept what is and what has been without question, we feel that you should get what you want out of life and thereafter." "And what do you want in return?" Phineas asked suspiciously. "There's a catch. There's always a catch." Orlox hefted the device in his hand. "This will do for the moment. After all, you could easily make another. You seem to be a man of talent and intelligence. We've been following you since you arrived. A little push on the thief's part in the way of monetary reward led him here to me, which also led you. And here we are." "And what do you intend to do with it?" "Come now. You of all people are no stranger to retribution. After all, that is what this is for, is it not? Let's just say that we are kindred spirits and leave it at that. And in return, you get what you want, and more. You can have your life back, the way it should be. I feel your pain and anguish. A man alone has no purpose. I can give that purpose back to you. Phineas looked at the prone Vlishginath, barely visible under the debris. Sensing his hesitation, Orlox continued. The cleansing light may be strong, but he does have his limitations. Think it over. When the time comes, Regulac will know how to find you. Pledge yourself to me and receive your reward, or lose everything. Again. Either way, I will be keeping this. It is just a matter of you getting what you want as well. He stood up and nodded to Regulac, who waved the staff, opening a shimmering portal. How do I let you know? Phineas asked as the images of his friends faded back to nothingness. We'll know. Until then, be wary of the Church Knight's motives. He would see your hopes dashed if it served his purpose. The two moved into the portal, which then vanished, leaving Phineas alone with Vlishginath. Just then, there was a loud crash as Vlishginath burst up through the timbers. Phineas hurried over and helped him move wooden debris out of the way. Where is he? Vlishginath asked once he'd secured retribution, doing his best to glance around menacingly and staggering in the process. Gone. He has the bomb. Did he say anything to you? Plenty, Phineas replied. He said plenty. With a practiced flourish, Vlishginath returned retribution to its scabbard, the sword ringing out angrily as if it to chastise the Church Knight for letting Orlox escape. Which direction did he head, Frakture? Vlishginath asked impatiently, stepping in close to Phineas and looking into the professor's eyes through the slits in his visor. He disappeared through a portal. He had an associate with him, Phineas replied absently, unable to push the visions of William and Abigail out of his thoughts. Vlishginath let out a frustrated howl, striding over and kicking the pile of rubble from which he'd been pulled. Still mumbling irritably as he stepped into the middle of the street, he took a deep breath as he stood next to Phineas, staring at the rubble and trying to clear his mind. All right, there aren't many places he could go, considering half the Western Kingdoms are looking for him. If he's gone somewhere, chances are it's nearby where he'd still have access to the gnomish engineers. So, Frakture, are you all right? Blinking, Phineas shook his head clear. Oh, yes, I'm sorry, but who exactly is this blonde friend of yours? His eyes narrowing, Vlishginath reached up and removed his helm. Orlox is no friend, and if he suggested otherwise, I assure you it was in jest. I suspect the only reason I am still alive is so that I might witness the destruction he is about to unleash. Phineas nodded slowly. So, what? Arthur married Guinevere and you're upset because... This isn't the time for your japes, Frakture, Vlishginath interrupted in a stern tone of voice. If Orlox activates your device over Ascension, he could obliterate the entire city, effectively eliminating the one thing standing between the Western Kingdoms and another age of darkness, the likes of which the world has not seen since before the Second Crusade, the second reign of the dead god, so to speak. Right, about this dead god, Phineas replied, emboldened by the prospect of Orlox's proposition. Would you care to explain why you never mentioned him before? In that moment, Vlishginath suddenly came to regard Phineas in a very different manner. Tilting his head, Vlishginath took on an altered tone, now speaking as if he were negotiating the release of a hostage. Listen very carefully, Frakture. Whatever Orlox may have promised you. A way home? Phineas replied, finding himself growing irritated. My life? The one I lost? Everything I once held dear? That, and then some, as if that weren't enough. Vlishginath shook his head. The dead god's promises are never what they seem. Lies and deception are the tools of Necros, and regardless of what you've been told, he does not reward loyal service in kind. Is that so? Phineas said, jamming a finger in Vlishginath's chest. So how do you explain them knowing about Abigail? And William? Does your mythos know as well? But let me guess. He simply chooses to conveniently leave you all to your fate. Is that it? Your thoughts lead you down a dark path, Frakture, Vlishginath replied, his voice going ice cold as his glowering blue eyes narrowed in on the professor. Know that if you cast in your lot with the Life Witherer, you and I will be enemies. For several long moments, the two regarded each other, Phineas meeting Vlishginath's caustic glare with an indignant stare of his own. Then, with a scoff, Phineas shook his head. I am a scientist, first and foremost, and I go by results, not promises. Your friend is the only one who has shown me tangible evidence thus far to support his assertion, whereas you have led me halfway across the most treacherous world I've ever had the misfortune of settling foot on. So unless you can give me a good reason why I should trust one lunatic over the other, I believe you and I no longer share a common goal. Your actions would condemn thousands of innocent lives, Frakture, all for the sake of pursuing that which you think will be returned to you. Try to think clearly. I always do. I gain everything and you lose everything. After being alone for so long, I'm willing to take that chance, Phineas replied shortly, and at that the professor turned about on his heel, leaving Vlishginath standing behind him. Frakture! Vlishginath called out. But by then, Phineas was already several paces away, waving a dismissive hand over his shoulder at the church knight. Closing his eyes, Vlishginath let out a deep sigh, standing alone in the middle of the street in front of the collapsed hovel for several moments. Finally, looking up, Vlishginath glanced around to regain his bearings before turning and striding in the direction of the church and muttering under his breath, I've got to get back to Ascension. Pfft, that fool knight. Who does he think he is? You and I will be his enemies. Is that supposed to be some kind of threat? Phineas scoffed, grumbling to himself and nearly running over a gnome as he wandered Darlashell's streets aimlessly. For what seemed like hours he continued to walk, his mind racing at the prospect of Orlox's offer, until eventually he cursed out loud. For someone who said he'd know when to show up, he sure is taking his sweet old time. I just had to be certain, came the voice of Orlox, the blonde dread knight appearing in an alley entrance. Not far behind him, the sorcerer Regulac stood with his wooden staff clutched in both hands, keeping a wary eye out as if Vlishginath would fall upon them at any moment. If I do this, if I help you, you can guarantee their return? Phineas asked. Orlox's eyes glowed with hunger as he smiled and nodded. Anything you desire. For several seconds, Phineas studied the dread knight intently, and Orlox met Phineas's gaze with an unblinking stare. Finally, with a nod, Phineas held out his hand. Yes, I believe I can work with that. Heaving in silent laughter, Orlox nodded in response, reaching out and grasping Phineas's hand. You've made a wise decision, Professor. That said, Regulac tapped the walls with his staff, opening another portal. Turning, Orlox motioned to Phineas with a wave of his hand, leading him back into the alley before disappearing through the shimmering blue gateway with Phineas in tow.